Okay, so for our entomology project, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Tim Goder about dung beetles. I'm Mandy, who is filming. This is Sarah, Olivia, and Jen.
Okay, so first question. In your opinion, what is the most vital ecological role that the dung beetle fills?
Well, they have a variety of ecosystem functions. Among them include things like seed dispersal because of the seeds that they're dispersing away from the dung pat. So that's one of the big ones. Another one is by reducing and degrading the dung pat, they're reducing parasitic and fly diseases, which is a big one. The most important one probably is how much nitrogen they return back to the soil. There are estimates on some pastures and some Serengeti plains and places like that there's actually tons per day kind of thing. We're talking a scale that just defies imagination. So that's probably the biggest one, and also overall improved pasture if you're keen on livestock, and grasslands if you're keen on what's going on in the wild, places like the Serengeti and things like that. So that's if I had to come up with the most important one, is the tunneling behavior basically increases the amount of nitrogen back into the environment. And you could add a few soil ration and there's a disease reduction.
Yeah. Okay.
Could you explain a little bit about how dung beetles have helped with the new field of evolutionary development?
Ooh, that's a big one. That's 3 lectures, Doug. But I happen to bring a prop with me. And so ever since the time of Darwin, these unusual and very large, bizarre horns that you find on various beetles have intrigued biologists. And so Darwin had an issue with it because how can you explain such a massive structure when it's likely to get in the way? How do you ever fly with it? Well, scarab beetles, of which dung beetles are a group, have these incredible horns. And the idea is around those horns as to how they evolved and why they evolved is basically getting at your question of evo devo. The how of it is the development. And so how do these animals develop such wicked horns? In the case of oncophagous species of dung beetles, which is the most species-rich group of animals on the planet. You probably can't see that diagram, but there's all kinds of shapes and sizes and especially locations of these bizarre horns. And so the development part of things is how do they do that? How do they produce the horns in so many different locations, and why? The why of it is because of the evolutionary component. Males that have horns like that are able to better defend females. And so the genes are more likely to be passed into the next generation if the female mates with that male that has the largest horns. And so how they produce the horns is basically based on nutrition as a larva within the crop. And number 2, it's based on when and where juvenile hormone acts in that cuticle. And so the combination of nutrition and juvenile hormone helps us understand the developmental component of that evolution of sexual selection. And it gets very complicated. You can read the paper, Doug.
Some supplementary reading for you.
Yes.
So some scientists want to introduce non-native dung beetle species into Alberta. What benefit may this have?
It's actually a friend of mine. He goes by the name of Kevin Float, who works with my brother on this very system at the University of Lethbridge. And so this title, called Calling on More Troops, is based on a significant problem in Alberta, and that is the tremendous amount of cattle dung that's now on our prairies. And the local species of dung beetles do not do a very good job of getting rid of that dung pat. And so the idea is the so-called native species are what are called the dwellers. They stay within the dung pat. But if you could somehow get introduced species that are so-called tunnelers, because they do a lot of the tunneling and really the degradation of the dung, much more so than our native species. And so the idea was to introduce a couple species that are these tunnelers from Europe to see what they could do to break down dung of the cattle problem that they had in Alberta. And it turns out that one of the first things you better find out is that it gets cold in Alberta. Does the Ontopegasaurus, do the populations able to survive the wicked winters? And it turns out they can. And so that was promising. What isn't so promising is when they go back a couple years and they find out that where they put the dung beetles, they can't find very many individuals. So it's not really doing the great job that they had hoped for yet. And so maybe they need to add more numbers, or maybe they need to be really selective in terms of the microclimate and stuff that they're adding these things to. There's a variety of things that are still being done. But the bottom line, can we introduce species of dung beetles to help alleviate the problem with the tremendous amount of cattle dung that are on the prairies? Certainly in our evolutionary time, no wonder there's never been that much dung. So that's why you don't have a huge diversity of dung beetles that are so-called tunnelers.
All right, and the last question. Have you ever had any personal experience with dung beetles?
Well, having taught entomology for many years now, one of the ecological categories I want my students to deal with is to actually go into dung of various types and actually see if they can find these beetles. And over the years we've had some luck, but again we don't have a huge diversity here. Cattle is not a major issue. And so we don't have a huge diversity, but if you can find them, if you are lucky enough to find raccoon poo or bear poo or dog poo, if you let it sit long enough, you can find them. Around the world, they are very specialized on certain types of dung. So when I go to Belize, there's actually howler monkey dung beetles. There's actually the big cat beetles, and we've been lucky enough in Belize to actually go searching for them. People wonder what the hell we're doing. But that's whoops. and so but it's pretty cool when there's the point being made. You look in various types of dung, and you can actually find the beetles associated with that dung, even in Belize. I've often asked Kevin what to do about trying to get, how do we get more species of, I know they're there, but cat dung, how are you ever going to find those? That very often. And so he's actually said use human feces. I said, oh, our students should be into that. And so they actually have, because you can put out some human feces and they come like crazy to it. So yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with finding dung beetles. Yeah.
Quite personal experience?
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim.
Yes, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.